There are a few things in life I hold sacred: my dog, my truck, and my late grandfather's lake house. It's not much, just a sturdy old cabin with a wraparound porch, a dock, and a fireplace where memories of laughter and quiet moments still linger. I grew up with that lake house. It was where my grandfather taught me about hard work, honor, and the value of family legacy. I never imagined that one day those same principles would be tested in the most unexpected way. It all began on a chilly autumn morning when I awoke to find signs that something was very wrong. At first, I noticed that the familiar creak of the screen door had been replaced by an eerie silence, and the sound of my loyal dog's bark was oddly absent. A sinking feeling gripped me as I stepped outside. My property, which I had safeguarded for years as a personal sanctuary, now bore evidence of an invasion. There were muddy footprints leading up to my porch, and in the front yard, an assortment of discarded items lay scattered as if someone had rummaged through every nook and cranny. My heart pounded as I pieced together the puzzle. Someone had trespassed into my house. The very thought of uninvited strangers violating the sanctity of my grandfather's legacy sent a surge of anger through my veins. I knew I had to act, not only to protect my home, but to ensure that those responsible would be held accountable. I gathered my thoughts and quickly dialed the number for legal counsel, determined to document every detail. I recalled every sound from that morning: the crunch of gravel underfoot, the whisper of wind against the old oak trees, and the unsettling absence of the warmth I usually felt in my cherished retreat. I wasn't going to let this breach go unnoticed. Little did I know, this invasion was only the beginning of a chain of events that would turn my world upside down and lead to a courtroom battle that would expose the full extent of the Homeowners Association's abuse of power. Cedar Lake Estates was supposed to be a peaceful, close-knit community, a place where every resident shared a commitment to preserving the beauty and order of our surroundings. Nestled on the edge of a sprawling forest and overlooking the serene waters of Cedar Lake, our neighborhood was known for its uniform houses, meticulously maintained lawns, and a strict homeowners association, HOA, that enforced a near-militaristic code of conduct. At the helm of the HOA was a woman known to everyone as Karen Miller. In her early 50s, Karen carried herself with an air of self-importance that bordered on authoritarian. Always clad in sharply pressed outfits and armed with a clipboard and smartphone, she roamed the streets of Cedar Lake Estates like a modern-day sentinel. Karen prided herself on enforcing every rule, no matter how trivial, from the proper angle of hedges to the exact shade of white for mailboxes. To her, order was not just an ideal, it was a sacred duty. I, on the other hand, was a lifelong resident with a different outlook. I had inherited my late grandfather's lake house, a modest, sturdy cabin that had seen countless summers and winters, each etched with memories of family gatherings, fishing trips, and quiet evenings by the fireplace. That lake house, with its wraparound porch and weathered charm, was my sanctuary. It was a symbol of independence and a testament to a simpler way of life, far removed from the rigid conformity that Karen so desperately sought to impose on our community. My dog, Duke, a loyal, spirited companion with a knack for sensing trouble, and my battered old truck, which had carried me through many an adventure, were constant reminders of the life I cherished. Together with the lake house, they embodied everything I believed in: personal freedom, hard work, and the right to live life on one's own terms. Yet, as peaceful as Cedar Lake Estates might seem on the surface, tensions had been simmering beneath. Many residents had grown resentful of the HOA's heavy-handed tactics, but few dared to stand up to Karen's iron grip. I had always tried to ignore her petty fines and arbitrary complaints, focusing instead on my own path. Until that morning, when I discovered the unsettling evidence of trespass at my house. It was a direct violation of everything I held sacred. My grandfather's legacy, the very essence of my home, had been invaded by individuals who cared little for the principles of respect and privacy. The intruders left behind more than just footprints and scattered belongings. They had tampered with locks, rifled through personal belongings, and even scribbled graffiti on the weathered wooden door of my cabin. It was an act of blatant disrespect that cut deep. I knew that I could not simply let it pass. This was about more than just property. It was about the right to protect one's legacy against those who would treat it as nothing more than an open invitation for mischief. In that moment, I resolved to fight back, not only to reclaim my home, but also to send a clear message that such a breach of privacy and trust would have consequences. Little did I know, the confrontation that was about to unfold would lead to a courtroom battle that would expose the full extent of the HOA's overreach and ultimately change the way our community was governed. The evidence of a trespass was overwhelming. I discovered that the intruders had not only violated my property, but had also attempted to conceal their tracks by scattering trash and leaving behind broken pieces of my cherished belongings. The most infuriating discovery, however, was that the HOA itself had been complicit, or at the very least, negligent. Karen Miller, whose duty was to protect the community's order, had ignored my repeated complaints about security and had even failed to inform me of any investigation into the incident. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, I began to compile every piece of evidence. I retrieved hours of security footage from the cameras I had installed around the lake house, noting every detail. The intruders' movements, their deliberate attempts to cover their tracks, and even a brief glimpse of a badge on one of them that suggested they might be connected to the HOA security team. I saved every frame, printed out screenshots, and documented the timestamps meticulously. This wasn't just a case of random vandalism. It was a coordinated breach, and the HOA's inaction was a slap in the face of my rights as a homeowner. I then took the matter to my attorney, who assured me that the law was on my side. The state property laws clearly stipulated the homeowner's private property was sacrosanct, and any unauthorized entry was a serious violation. With my digital dossier in hand, I filed a lawsuit against the HOA for trespass and negligence. I wanted accountability, not just for the intrusion into my home, but for the complete disregard of my rights by those entrusted with maintaining community order. As I prepared for the legal battle, the community began to take notice. Neighbors who had long harbored quiet resentment of the HOA's draconian rules started to share their own stories of arbitrary fines and unexplained intrusions. The local community forum became a hive of activity, with posts condemning the HOA's lack of oversight and praising my decision to stand up for my property. Hashtags such as hashtag #MyHouseRules and hashtag #NoMoreTrespass trended among residents. And it wasn't long before digital petitions demanding reform of the HOA's practices gathered thousands of signatures. Karen Miller, ever the picture of unyielding authority, attempted to spin the narrative. In a series of statements released to the community, she claimed that the intruders were part of a rogue group, acting independently, and that the HOA was investigating the matter. Her words, however, rang hollow in the face of the mountain of digital evidence I had amassed. My attorney warned me that Karen's failure to act promptly or to even inform me of any progress in her investigation would likely be used as evidence in court, further undermining her credibility. Meanwhile, I began preparing for the inevitable courtroom showdown. I consulted with experts in property law, gathered testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed suspicious activity, and even secured statements from local law enforcement officials who confirmed that the breach was a serious violation of privacy. Every piece of evidence painted a damning picture of an HOA that not only allowed trespass to occur, but also failed to protect the very residents it was supposed to serve. The conflict escalated when I discovered that the trespass wasn't an isolated incident. Further investigation revealed that the same group, apparently acting with some level of complicity from the HOA security team, had been involved in similar breaches at other properties. This revelation added a layer of systemic corruption to the case, turning what was once a personal grievance into a full-blown legal crusade against the HOA's abusive practices. Every day brought new evidence, and every evening I would update my online community with the latest findings. The digital dossier grew, and with it, the collective anger of a community that had long felt oppressed by arbitrary rules. I knew that this was a battle for more than just my house. It was a stand for every homeowner's right to privacy and security. The tension was mounting, and it was clear that the HOA board was on shaky ground. Internal memos leaked online showed a growing division among board members, some defending Karen's hardline approach, others pleading for a more measured, respectful enforcement of the rules. As my lawsuit made its way through the legal system, the community rallied behind me, sending messages of support and demanding accountability. I could feel the pressure building to a breaking point. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force the HOA to reckon with its own failings. A confrontation that would eventually lead to a courtroom battle with consequences that would reverberate far beyond my property. In the weeks following the filing of my lawsuit, the story of the trespass spread like wildfire throughout Cedar Lake. Social media erupted with videos of my security footage, along with detailed posts outlining every violation of my property. Hashtags such as hashtag #MyHouseRules and hashtag #NoMoreTrespass trended locally, as residents who had long been oppressed by the HOA's draconian measures finally found their voices. Local news outlets picked up the story with enthusiasm. Reporters interviewed shocked neighbors and captured live footage of the now infamous property where the trespass had occurred. "It's an outrageous breach of privacy," one anchor declared, and a stark reminder that no one, not even a powerful HOA, can trample on the rights of a homeowner. The narrative quickly shifted from a simple case of vandalism to a broader discussion about the misuse of power by community enforcers. Inside the HOA board, the mounting public outcry created an atmosphere of palpable tension. Emergency meetings were convened, and behind closed doors, board members clattered over how to address the situation. Leaked minutes from these meetings revealed deep divisions. While some members defended Karen Miller's strict approach as necessary to maintain community order, others were increasingly disturbed by her negligence and inaction following the trespass. "We must protect our residents' rights, or we risk losing their trust forever," one senior board member was quoted as saying. The internal turmoil only amplified the public demand for accountability. I continued to build my digital dossier, posting updates on the community forum and sharing every piece of evidence I could gather: detailed logs, time-stamped security footage, and even recordings of neighbor testimonies. Every shared video clip and every supportive comment served as a rallying cry for a community long starved of respect for its individual rights. Digital petitions demanding an investigation into the HOA's failure to protect private property quickly amassed thousands of signatures. The sentiment was clear. If the HOA would not stand up for its residents, then the community would take matters into its own hands. Karen Miller tried desperately to regain control of the narrative. In a series of hastily recorded videos posted on the HOA's official channels, she claimed that the trespass was an isolated incident perpetrated by unruly outsiders, and that the HOA was doing everything in its power to investigate. But every attempt to spin her version of events was met with overwhelming digital evidence that told a different story. My footage showed not only the intruders in clear detail, but also captured Karen's own suspicious behavior, her late-night patrols, her unaccounted-for absences during the incident, and even a whispered conversation caught on audio that suggested she might have been aware of the breach long before it was discovered. The escalating tension was not confined to the digital realm. Local law enforcement, spurred by the numerous complaints and the undeniable evidence, began a formal investigation into the HOA's practices. A county inspector visited the property, meticulously examining the security system and questioning residents about previous incidents of trespass. Their findings would later serve as key evidence in court, further undermining the credibility of the HOA board and, by extension, Karen Miller. As the legal proceedings gathered momentum, the community's support for my cause grew stronger. Neighbors organized rallies, handing out flyers, and holding impromptu town hall meetings to discuss the broader implications of the trespass. "This isn't just about one house," a local activist declared at one meeting. "It's about our fundamental right to privacy and the duty of our community to protect it." The collective voice of Cedar Lake was rising, and every shared post and every hashtag reinforced the simple message: private property rights are not up for negotiation. Amid the chaos, my lawsuit continued to make its way through the legal system, and I received encouraging feedback from my attorney about the strength of my case. The digital dossier, now a comprehensive archive of every transgression and every failed attempt by the HOA to address the issue, was widely regarded as a turning point in the battle for homeowners' rights. I even began receiving messages from residents in neighboring communities who expressed their admiration for my stand and offered to join the movement for reform. The pressure on the HOA board reached a fever pitch when they announced a final public hearing to address the trespass incident and to decide on disciplinary action against those involved. The hearing was set for a crisp morning, and in the days leading up to it, the digital petitions and community forums were flooded with calls for accountability. It was clear that if the board did not act decisively, the repercussions would be far-reaching, not just for me, but for every homeowner in Cedar Lake. On the morning of the hearing, the atmosphere in the community center was electric. Residents packed the room, many carrying signs that read, "Our home, our rights, and no more trespass." Every whispered conversation, every nod of solidarity, underscored the shared determination to reclaim our privacy. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a moment when the full force of the community's collective will would force the HOA to confront its failings and restore the rights of its residents. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, clear morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Lake Community Center. The room was filled with a diverse mix of HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of determined residents, all gathered to witness the final public hearing that would determine the future of property rights in our community. With a calm, yet unwavering presence, Councilwoman Evelyn Price stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the hope and resolve of a community that had endured too much. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed logs of the trespass, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Price began, her voice resonant and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by the Homeowners Association, and by extension Mrs. Karen Miller, in allowing trespass on a private property, were not only negligent, but a blatant abuse of power. Our community's rights as individual homeowners must be upheld, and no one should be allowed to violate the sanctity of a home, especially one that holds the legacy of a family and the spirit of independence. A heavy silence fell over the room as Price continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines and sanctions related to this incident, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the policies and practices that allowed such a breach of privacy to occur. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines designed to protect every resident's right to secure and private property. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an injustice. It is a resounding declaration that Cedar Lake will stand for fairness, accountability, and the inviolable right to live without fear of arbitrary intrusion. Her words struck a deep chord, and murmurs of approval rippled throughout the assembly. At that moment, a longtime community advocate, a stalwart defender of homeowners' rights, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice strong and impassioned. "No one in our community should have their home violated by the whims of those who claim to enforce order. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our privacy and property rights are non-negotiable. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every breach of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His words were met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a powerful call for change. Following his address, a senior officer from the local property oversight agency presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports that confirmed the gravity of the trespass and the systematic failure of the HOA to protect private property. The evidence was irrefutable. The intrusion had been a deliberate act, and the failure to act promptly had only compounded the violation. The Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against those responsible, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Price concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Lake, a community where every resident's rights are respected, where public authority is exercised with integrity, and where our homes are truly our sanctuaries." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, regardless of their position, can impose their will upon our lives without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live in peace and security. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for privacy and property rights. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Lake. The days of arbitrary trespass and unchecked power were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Lake underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking fervent debates about property rights, community governance, and the sanctity of private homes. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Lake" and "Community United for Privacy," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to live without arbitrary intrusion. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #NoMoreTrespass, and #HomeIsSacred trended widely, reinforcing the community's steadfast determination to stand up against abuses of power. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and envision a future where individual privacy was not only respected but celebrated. Neighbors, who had long lived in fear of invasive HOA practices, now spoke openly about their right to secure their homes and protect their legacies. Our homes are our sanctuaries, places where our memories, our values, and our dreams are kept safe, one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice echoing throughout the crowded hall. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Cedar Lake would always stand for justice and personal freedom. Within the reformed HOA board and local oversight agencies, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focused on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized fairly and that no resident would ever again be subject to arbitrary trespassing or invasive enforcement. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed at a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the renewed commitment to integrity and justice. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations also mobilized to empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and the importance of safeguarding our private spaces. When we stand together, our voices have the power to transform our community, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring residents to unite and demand fair governance. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to fight back against the unauthorized trespass, a violation of my late grandfather's cherished lake house and my sacred sanctuary, had not only reclaimed my privacy, but had ignited a movement that resonated throughout Cedar Lake. Neighbors who had long endured the oppressive oversight of the HOA now found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance. The digital evidence that exposed the breach became a beacon of hope, a rallying cry for every resident who believed that a home is more than just a structure. It is a sanctuary of memories, values, and freedom. Karen Miller, once the feared enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that no one is above accountability when a community unites for justice. Her influence waned rapidly, and digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Lake, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the soft glow of a setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Home" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches echoed with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not just the victory of our rights, but the strength of a community that refuses to let its sanctuaries be violated, Councilwoman Price proclaimed, her voice filled with unwavering determination. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our homes and our freedoms. As each new day dawned over Cedar Lake, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how the HOA's trespass into my private property cost them dearly in court became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of home and the right to privacy. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Cedar Lake, truth, justice, and personal freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Lake would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for private sanctuaries were cherished above all else.